Hello, and welcome back to another edition of Tips and Tricks. Today we're going to take a look at this really awesome plugin called Battalion by Unfiltered Audio, which is a drum machine, drum sampler, drum synthesizer, and we're going to combine it with my plugin, Waymaker, which is a sequencer. And I'm going to show you how we can use these two tools together to kind of get some really fun generative beats and just kind of think a bit outside the box when it comes to drums. So to start, I'm going to just walk through how Battalion responds to MIDI notes. Basically, Battalion kind of responds to C and up. So I'll just show real quick. We have 8 tracks here, and if I play a C, we get the kick drum. And it doesn't matter what octave we're in, actually. So any C is going to be track number 1. And then it goes up chromatically from there. And by the way, Battalion just has some really fun sounds. It's a nice little drum synthesizer. It's really fun to mess around with. So we are going to sequence this. Battalion has a built-in sequencer, but I'm going to pull up Waymaker. So I'm going to add Waymaker to a second track. And I am going to set Battalion to just receive MIDI from it. Cool. Okay, so I am going to first set the scale in Waymaker. Like I said, Battalion responds to chromatic notes, so I'm actually going to turn off the scale entirely. So I'm going to set that to none, which means that we can generate any pitch on the keyboard. But I'm going to keep the root note as C, because if you remember, Battalion kind of considers C to be its root note as well. That's kind of what it calls its kick drum. So if I just play this sequence right here, we have the world's worst drum beat because it's just a bunch of C4s playing every quarter note. So I want to kind of create something a bit more interesting. So to do that, I'm going to pull up one of Waymaker's morph sequencers. So if you're not already familiar with Waymaker, a morph sequencer is kind of a step sequencer, but it kind of changes randomly over time. We have this generated melody, and that is going to change every time it loops. So I'm going to make a full 16-step sequence, and I'm going to speed it up to 16th notes. So let's just hear this completely random beat, basically. So right now it's completely random, and now we want to kind of start thinking about how we can make this beat a little bit more predictable, and just kind of conform a little bit to maybe what we are accustomed to hearing. I showed a way to do this already on this channel about a week ago, how we can kind of lock certain stages of the morph sequencer to always play certain pitches. So in the morph sequencer, we kind of have this ability to just kind of take some stages and make sure that they don't change. So this is really nice if you want to dial in like a kick drum or a snare on certain stages something that we might expect to hear. So for example, I'm going to make it so the first note is always a kick drum. It's always going to be a C. And I'm going to make it so we always play a snare, which is a C sharp on the 5th stage and the 13th stage. So we're going to get kind of like a classic kick and snare thing going. Let's just hear how that sounds. So it's already way more coherent. We've got a snare that lands on the place that we expect. We got a kick drum that's kind of anchoring everything. It's just, at least to my ear, it sounds much more what I'd expect from a drum beat, I'd say. But let's mix things up a little bit. One thing I want to point out is that we can play around with the pitch range here in the morph sequencer. So right now, all of the pitches that we're playing are kind of randomly selected from a full octave. And that means two things. It means that it's possible to play any of these drum sounds in Battalion because they only span a fifth rather than an octave. And it also means that there are some notes that are not going to play anything. So if you remember, Battalion goes from a C up to a G, I believe. So we have some notes in the sequence, such as a B or an A sharp, and they're not actually going to play anything. So that means that there are going to be some rests in the sequence. If we don't want any rests, we could restrict our pitch range. So, for example, if we set it from C to G, now every single one of these notes is going to be spoken for in Battalion. Let's hear how that sounds. And if I expand that range again, we're going to start hearing those rests again. So that's one thing to be aware of, kind of whether or not you want to have rests in your sequence. And then there's one other thing I want to point out. So I think it's fun to mix in something like a little bit of probability here. So say we go back here, let's dial this in such that every note that we generate is going to be kind of possible to play in Battalion. And then let's put a probability module after that morph sequencer. So now we can do this. We can start to thin out our drum beat just with simple probability, just adding a random chance that a note happens or doesn't happen. However, that means that kind of all elements in the beat are kind of liable to disappear. And when I was playing with this combination for the first time, I was thinking that it would be nice to kind of keep some elements of the beat present. And one thing that I think would be nice to kind of keep going would be the kick drum. I think that Battalion has these really awesome kick drums that, just are really thumpy and sound great. But it also has all this really fun percussion as well. So I kind of want to have random percussion, but consistent kick drums. So here's how I'm going to accomplish that. Firstly, I'm going to set the morph range to actually omit the C. So that means that the kick drum will never happen. Let's just kind of hear a bit of this beat and kind of see how it sounds without that kick drum. Okay, it sounds fine. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick a beat sequencer all the way at the end of my chain. And I'm going to set up this beat sequencer in a very particular way. I want this sequencer to generate notes, and I want it to allow previous notes through as well. So it's going to generate its own pattern, and it's going to let all of this through as well. So they're going to compound together. And I think that this is going to accomplish kind of exactly what we want, because the beat sequencer always plays the root note, which in this case is going to be C. So our beat sequencer is going to output C pitches, which are going to be the kick drum. So we've got this random percussion loop going into a probability module, and then all of that is going to compound together with a stable kick drum pattern. So I'm just going to draw in, a kick drum pattern that I want to hear. Something like that looks pretty good. And then I'm going to mess around with the previous settings here, such as the probability or the range, the rate of change, all of that stuff. But our kick drum pattern is going to stay consistent. So let's hear how that sounds. So we've got this kind of randomly changing drum beat, but the whole thing is anchored by this kick drum, which is really nice, I think. The one thing I want to point out is that in our percussion loop, this is also the source of our snare, which is always passing through. The issue is that that snare is liable to get dropped via the probability, which personally I think is kind of cool. But there are also ways that we could get around that, which I'll show now. So you hear how the snare was dropped in that case. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to restrict our range once more. I'm going to make sure that this range can't play kicks or snares. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw another sequencer at the end of our chain. It's going to be a traditional step sequencer. And this sequence is also going to generate MIDI. It's also going to allow notes through. And I'm just going to set it to progress every quarter note. And now I'm going to turn off these notes. And I'm going to manually add in that C sharp, which is going to play our snare. So let's hear that. So now we've created this chain where the percussion, kind of the more characterful parts of the beat are kind of being generated. They're being affected by this probability. But we have this stable kick drum pattern and we have this stable snare pattern. And we can take this, as far as we want to. For example, I could stick a step sequencer after our percussion. Let's say I want to have some kind of generative ratchets in here. So I'm going to create and add a branching step sequencer, which is going to add MIDI. And because I am not transposing any of these steps, it's just going to repeat the same note that it receives. And if we reduce the probability, just so it doesn't get overwhelming, we'll start to hear these kind of random 64th note ratchets kind of thrown in there. And we can start to think about, like, you know, maybe you want your kicks or your snares to have that ratchet as well. So in that case, I mean, we can just move that branching module to the end of the chain completely. So basically, the takeaway here is we can use Waymaker to kind of sequence these drum beats. We just think a little bit about which notes we want to trigger and how we want to trigger them, and kind of we can compound the outputs of multiple sequencers and just kind of sum them up into one coherent beat. And I think the takeaway that I want to underscore here is just thinking about kind of in what order you are generating these different elements of the beat. So, for example, I really like when the percussion in the beat is kind of liable to, get dropped out due to probability, or, has random ratchets, or has, kind of like a note echo effect in there. I think that that's really fun, but maybe you like that effect on your kick drums or your snares. So you can kind of play around with where the probability lands in the chain, and kind of what flows into what. You could have your kick drum first in the chain, going into the percussion, then going into the probability, and then going into the snare. Like, you really want the snare to always happen. Maybe you want the opposite. Maybe you don't care if the snare happens all the time. You want the kick drum to always come through, which is kind of how I'd originally set this up. So I think you can kind of really start to play around with kind of how this beat, behaves. Which elements of it are predictable, which elements of it are liable to a bit more generative behavior. And I think that Battalion is a really cool tool that really lends itself to this kind of style of sequencing, just because it sounds awesome. It has a lot of variation built in, and I think it responds really well to sequences that have a variety as well. So I'm just going to play around for a little bit, and then I'll catch you in the next one.